Jack Mercer spent 43 years building his fortune. It took his daughter-in-law less than 3 weeks to convince herself it already belonged to her. Jack looked like every other retired businessman. He sold his landscaping company for over $5 million, but still lived in a simple wooden house on Lake Blue Ridge. People often asked why he hadn't bought a mansion. Jack always gave the same answer: because I already found everything I wanted. After his wife passed away, there was only one person who could truly brighten the lake house: his son, Evan. Evan was 38 now. Married. Living in Atlanta. The weekend visits had disappeared first, slowly replaced by busy careers and adulthood. Then Madison entered the family. She was beautiful, intelligent, and called Jack Dad before the wedding even took place. The first year passed peacefully. Then, almost too gradually to notice, the conversations began changing. So, Madison smiled over dinner. What made you decide to sell the company? Jack chuckled. My knees started making business decisions before my brain did. A month later. Another question. Did you invest most of the money? Jack smiled politely. I've done all right. Another visit. That lake house must be worth much more now. You really don't know? No. Every question sounded harmless. Every smile looked genuine. But every road somehow led back to the exact same destination. His money. His retirement. His estate. Jack noticed. He simply chose not to mention it. Then, one quiet Saturday evening, everything changed. The following Saturday, Evan called. It wasn't unusual. The timing was. Dad, he said, trying to sound cheerful, we were thinking about coming up this weekend. Jack smiled to himself. You're always welcome. There was a brief silence. Just long enough for Jack to notice. Then Evan continued. Madison found a new recipe she wants you to try. I'll look forward to it. Jack ended the call and placed his phone on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking forward to seeing his own son. That realization hurt more than the conversation he'd overheard. Saturday arrived with clear skies and cool air. Just after noon. Evan's SUV rolled into the driveway. Madison stepped out first. She smiled exactly as she always had. Warm. Confident. Effortlessly friendly. If Jack hadn't overheard that phone call, he would have believed every bit of it. She walked over and hugged him. It's so good to see you. Jack returned the hug. You too. She held him for just a second longer than usual. Then stepped back and steadied him. You look tired. Jack smiled. I've been pulling weeds all morning. She laughed. You work harder in retirement than most people do at their jobs. The afternoon passed quietly. They walked around the property. Evan helped repair one section of the dock. Madison took dozens of photographs of the lake. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Until dinner. Halfway through the meal, Madison placed her fork down. I've been thinking. Jack looked up. That's usually dangerous. She laughed. So I've heard. She leaned forward slightly. You spend a lot of time here alone. I enjoy it. I know. She nodded. But doesn't it ever get lonely? Jack glanced toward the lake outside the dining room window. Sometimes. Madison smiled sympathetically. I just worry about you. I'm doing all right. I know you are. She paused. But accidents happen. Jack noticed Evan stop eating. His son suddenly seemed fascinated by the mashed potatoes on his plate. Madison continued. If you ever slipped near the dock. If you became sick. No one would know for hours. Jack answered calmly. My neighbors check on me. They're wonderful people. She smiled. But they're not family. There it was. The conversation had arrived exactly where she wanted it. Jack simply nodded. I appreciate your concern. Nothing more. Later that evening, Jack excused himself and stepped outside. The cool night air felt refreshing. He stood near the dock watching moonlight shimmer across the water. A minute later, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Evan. "You all right?" Jack asked. Evan shrugged. "Yeah." Then he sighed. "Actually, I'm not sure." Jack waited. He had learned long ago. Silence often encouraged honesty. Evan stared across the lake. "Do you ever feel like life just—" He searched for the words. "Gets away from you?" Jack looked at his son. "More often than I'd like." Another silence. Then Evan forced a smile. "Forget it. I'm just stressed." "Work?" Jack asked. Evan hesitated. "Something like that." Jack wanted to ask more. He wanted to ask if the stress had anything to do with debt, or the conversation he'd overheard, or Madison's growing interest in his estate. Instead, he said nothing. Because he needed facts, not assumptions. The next morning, after Evan and Madison left, Jack sat alone on the porch. His untouched coffee had already gone cold. He finally admitted something to himself. He couldn't solve this alone. If Madison truly intended to manipulate him, he needed someone who understood the law better than he did. Someone who had seen situations like this before. Someone who knew how to protect people without creating a family war. Jack walked inside, opened the drawer beside the refrigerator, and pulled out an old leather address book. Most of the numbers inside hadn't been called in years. Friends who had moved away. Former clients. Old employees. Then he found the name he was looking for. Benjamin Carter. Estate attorney. Benjamin had helped Jack sell his company. He had also prepared Linda's estate after her passing. Jack trusted him completely. He picked up the phone. Dialed the number. It rang twice. A familiar voice answered. "Benjamin Carter speaking." Jack took a slow breath. "It's Jack Mercer." "Jack." Benjamin sounded genuinely pleased. "It's been too long." Jack looked out across the lake once more. "I need your help." Benjamin's tone changed instantly. "What happened?" Jack answered with 4 quiet words. "I think I'm being hunted." There was complete silence on the other end of the phone. Then Benjamin spoke. "Don't tell me anything else over the phone. Come to my office tomorrow morning." "And Jack?" "Whatever this is, we'll handle it." Benjamin Carter's office overlooked the town square. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't modern. But it had earned something far more valuable than appearances. Trust. Jack arrived 15 minutes early. Benjamin was already waiting. The attorney stood as Jack entered. His firm handshake hadn't changed in 20 years. "It's good to see you." "I wish it were under better circumstances," Jack replied. Benjamin led him into a private conference room and closed the door. He placed both phones inside a drawer. Then turned the white noise machine on. A soft hum filled the room. "No interruptions," Benjamin said. "No recordings. No surprises." He sat down. "Now tell me everything." Jack didn't rush. He started with the subtle questions Madison had been asking over the past year. Questions about retirement. Questions about investments. Questions about the lake house. Questions about his will. Benjamin listened without speaking. He simply made notes. Then Jack described the phone call. Every word he remembered. Every pause. Every sentence. Especially one. "Once his estate is ours, everything changes." Benjamin slowly removed his glasses. He folded them carefully and placed them on the table. That alone told Jack everything. This was serious. "When exactly did this happen?" Benjamin asked. 8 days ago." "And you haven't confronted them?" Jack shook his head. "No." Benjamin gave the slightest nod. "Good." Jack looked surprised. "You think I should have stayed quiet?" Benjamin leaned back. "If someone is trying to manipulate you, the worst thing you can do is let them know they've been discovered." Jack remained silent. Benjamin continued. "Right now, They believe they're ahead. Let's keep it that way. Jack frowned. So what do we do? Benjamin answered immediately. We gather evidence. We verify facts. And we prepare. In case this becomes something much larger. Jack slowly nodded. Do you think they'll actually try to take control of my estate? Benjamin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened one of Jack's estate files. The documents were immaculate. Everything had been updated only a year earlier. You've built your estate correctly, Benjamin said. But I've practiced estate law for 32 years. I've learned something. Greed doesn't begin with stealing. It begins with entitlement. Jack looked down. Those words settled heavily. Because they sounded true. Benjamin closed the file. I want you to meet someone. Who? A former FBI financial crimes investigator. Rachel Brooks. Jack raised an eyebrow. The FBI? Benjamin smiled faintly. Retired. But retirement didn't make her less observant. She spent 25 years investigating elder financial exploitation. If anyone can tell us whether this is paranoia or a carefully planned scheme, it's Rachel. The following afternoon, Jack drove to a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. Benjamin was already there. Across from him sat a woman in her early 60s. Short gray hair. Simple navy jacket. No jewelry except a wedding band that had clearly been worn for decades. She stood as Jack approached. You must be Mr. Mercer. Jack is fine. She smiled. Rachel Brooks. Her handshake was firm. Confident. The handshake of someone who spent an entire career looking directly at people. And waiting for them to lie. After introductions, Benjamin briefly summarized the situation. Rachel never interrupted. She watched Jack instead. Studying not only what he said, but how he said it. When he finished, Rachel folded her hands. I have one question. Jack nodded. If your son needed $200,000 today, what would you do? Jack answered without hesitation. If it truly saved his family, I'd help him. Rachel nodded once. And if he simply asked? I'd still help. Jack replied. Maybe not every dollar. But I'd never let him lose everything. Rachel looked toward Benjamin. Then back at Jack. That answer tells me something. What? Jack asked. She spoke calmly. If they're planning to manipulate you, it's not because they had no other choice. It's because they believed manipulation would give them more. The words hung in the air. Jack felt something inside him sink. Not because Rachel had revealed anything new, but because she had confirmed what he had been refusing to believe. Rachel opened a slim notebook. If we're doing this, we do it quietly. No accusations. No emotional confrontations. And absolutely no warnings. Jack nodded. What do you need from me? Rachel smiled slightly. Patience. She closed the notebook. People who think they're smarter than everyone else usually make the biggest mistakes. Benjamin slid a legal pad across the table. Starting today, you'll write down every unusual conversation. Every strange question. Every unexpected visit. No detail is too small. Rachel stood. So begins the waiting. Jack looked at both of them. And if we're right? Rachel answered without blinking. Then eventually, they'll stop pretending. Rachel wasn't interested in theories. She believed in patterns. Patterns never lied. People did. Over the next several days, she began quietly building a timeline. She didn't contact Madison. She didn't contact Evan. She didn't want them to know they existed. Instead, she started with public records. Property records. Court filings. Business registrations. Loan documents. Civil lawsuits. Everything that could legally be obtained without raising suspicion. 3 days later, Jack received a call. "Can you meet us?" Rachel asked. "Today." Her voice remained calm. But Jack sensed urgency. They met at Benjamin's office. Rachel had several folders spread across the conference table. None of them looked encouraging. She looked up as Jack entered. "We found something." Jack sat down. "What is it?" Rachel slid the first folder toward him. "Court records." Jack opened it. Inside were copies of collection lawsuits. Credit card companies. Finance companies. Private lenders. He looked confused. "What am I looking at?" Rachel answered quietly. "Evan and Madison. They're drowning." Jack turned another page. Then another. Every document seemed worse than the last. Missed payments. Default notices. Collection actions. Judgments. Benjamin spoke. "We've estimated their unsecured debt at approximately $180,000. Jack slowly looked up. $180,000? Rachel nodded. "And that's only what we can verify." Jack leaned back in his chair. His first reaction wasn't anger. It was sadness. Evan never said a word. Benjamin folded his hands. "People often hide financial problems. What concerns me is what happened after they hid them." Rachel opened another folder. "There's more." Inside were copies of vehicle loan notices, late mortgage payments, 2 maxed-out credit cards, and a notice from a bank threatening foreclosure proceedings if missed payments continued. Jack stared silently at the paperwork. "So," he whispered, "this is why." Rachel nodded. "This explains the motive. It doesn't explain the plan." She reached for a smaller folder. "This does." Inside were printed internet search records obtained through a lawful investigator's source. Rachel tapped the highlighted lines. "How does adult guardianship work? Can elderly parents lose control of finances? Signs of mental decline. Conservatorship process in Georgia." Jack's stomach tightened. "They've been researching this?" "For months," Rachel replied. Benjamin looked directly at Jack. "I don't believe they're waiting for you to die. I believe they're trying to gain control while you're alive." Silence filled the room. Jack suddenly remembered every strange question Madison had asked. Every comment about aging. Every concern about him living alone. Every casual remark about memory. None of it felt casual anymore. Rachel closed the folder. "We're no longer dealing with curiosity. We're dealing with preparation." Jack rubbed his forehead. "What do we do now?" Benjamin answered. "We stay ahead of them." Rachel smiled slightly. "I'd actually prefer something better." Jack looked at her. "What?" She leaned forward. "We let them believe they're ahead." Jack frowned. "I don't understand." Rachel's expression never changed. "People become careless when they think they're winning." She paused. Then added the sentence Jack would remember for the rest of his life. "Never interrupt someone while they're making a mistake." The following weekend, Madison called unexpectedly. "Jack," she said warmly, "I've been talking with Evan. We've been thinking." Jack remained silent. "Our apartment lease ends next month. And honestly, it doesn't make sense to rent another place right away." Jack already knew what was coming. "We thought," Madison continued, "maybe we could stay with you for a little while. Just until we get back on our feet." Jack closed his eyes for a brief moment. Exactly as Rachel had predicted. They weren't waiting anymore. They were making their move. When he opened his eyes, his voice sounded calm. Almost cheerful. Of course. You'll always have a place here. Madison sounded relieved. Oh, Jack. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means. Jack looked out through the kitchen window toward the quiet lake. He knew exactly what it meant. After ending the call, he dialed Rachel. She answered on the second ring. They're moving in. Rachel didn't sound surprised. Good. Jack blinked. Good? Yes. She replied calmly. Because now, they'll have to stop planning and start acting. And that's when people leave evidence. Jack hung up the phone and stood motionless in the middle of the kitchen. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For years, he had imagined hearing his son say those words. Dad, can we stay with you for a while? He had always pictured it differently. Family dinners. Laughter. Second chances. Not investigations. Hidden motives. And legal strategies. Rachel arrived the following afternoon. She carried 2 small cases that looked like ordinary toolboxes. Jack met her in the garage. What's in those? She smiled. Insurance. She opened the first case. Inside were several tiny security cameras. Each one no larger than the tip of a thumb. Jack picked one up. I would have walked past this 100 times. That's the idea. Rachel replied. Over the next 2 hours, they installed cameras inside Jack's office. One overlooked the desk. Another faced the filing cabinet. A third watched the doorway. None of them pointed toward bedrooms. None of them recorded private living spaces. Rachel insisted everything remain legal. We're protecting evidence, she said. Not invading privacy. When they finished, she handed Jack a small digital recorder. Keep this in your pocket. If a conversation feels important, turn it on. Jack nodded. I never thought I'd be recording my own family. Rachel looked at him. I don't think you are. I think you're recording people who are pretending to be family. 3 days later, a moving truck appeared at the end of the driveway. Jack watched from the porch as Evan climbed out of the driver's seat. His face looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He forced a smile, but it never reached them. Madison stepped out moments later. Unlike Evan, she looked energized. Almost excited. She wrapped Jack in a warm hug. Thank you again, she said. We'll only stay until we get everything sorted out. Jack smiled politely. Take all the time you need. By sunset, their belongings filled 2 guest bedrooms. Boxes lined the hallway. Suitcases crowded the living room. The peaceful lake house suddenly felt smaller. That evening, Madison volunteered to cook dinner. She laughed. She joked. She complimented Jack's home. Anyone watching would have believed she was the perfect daughter-in-law. Rachel had warned him about that. The best manipulators, she'd said, don't begin by taking. They begin by becoming indispensable. Over the next week, Madison slowly inserted herself into every part of Jack's routine. She insisted on grocery shopping. She organized the pantry. She offered to sort old paperwork. She reminded Jack about appointments he hadn't forgotten. Every action looked thoughtful, helpful, kind. But Jack noticed something. She always seemed most interested when money was involved. One afternoon, she stepped into his office carrying fresh coffee. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Jack replied. She placed the mug beside his desk. Her eyes wandered across the room. Family photographs. Awards. Tax folders. Investment binders. A locked filing cabinet. You've always been so organized. She smiled. Jack chuckled. Years of running a business. She nodded. It must be nice knowing exactly where everything is. Jack looked directly at her. It certainly helps. For just a fraction of a second, her eyes settled on the filing cabinet. Then the smile returned. Rachel reviewed the camera footage that evening. She paused the recording, zoomed in, and froze a single frame. "There," she said. Jack leaned closer. "What am I looking at?" Rachel pointed toward Madison's eyes. "She's not looking at you. She's looking at the cabinet." Jack stared at the screen. Now that Rachel had pointed it out, he couldn't unsee it. "Most people," Rachel explained, "look at whoever they're speaking to. Someone planning theft looks at the object they intend to steal." The following afternoon, Jack decided it was time. Benjamin had prepared several fake financial folders. Everything inside looked authentic. Investment summaries, property valuations, retirement statements, tax records. Every number had been carefully fabricated. Enough to tempt someone. Not enough to cause damage. Jack intentionally left the folders on his desk, half open, as if he'd been interrupted while working. Then he left the office door unlocked, grabbed his fishing rod, and walked toward the dock. He didn't fish. Instead, he watched the office window reflected in the surface of the lake, waiting. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Nothing happened. Then, the curtain moved. Just slightly. Jack lowered his eyes, pretending to focus on the water. From the corner of his vision, he saw Madison quietly enter the office. She looked down the hallway, made sure no one was watching, then disappeared inside. Back at the house, one of Rachel's hidden cameras captured everything. Jack and Rachel returned to the lake house just before sunset. Everything looked perfectly normal. Madison was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Evan was outside tightening a loose board on the dock. If Jack hadn't watched the security footage himself, he would have believed nothing had happened. Madison smiled as soon as he walked through the door. "There you are. I was beginning to worry." Jack set the grocery bags on the counter. "I got caught talking to an old friend." She laughed softly. "You've always been everyone's favorite conversation." Jack smiled politely. But inside, every compliment now sounded rehearsed. Dinner was unusually quiet. Evan barely spoke. Every few minutes he glanced toward Madison, as if searching for permission before saying anything. Jack noticed. Rachel would have noticed too. After dinner, Evan helped Jack carry empty plates into the kitchen. For the first time all week, they found themselves alone. "Dad?" Evan said quietly. Jack looked at him. "What is it?" Evan hesitated. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then forced a smile. "Nothing." "You sure?" "Yeah. I'm just tired." Jack studied his son's face. The words said one thing. His eyes said another. Late that night, everyone had gone to bed. Or so they believed. Jack quietly walked downstairs for a glass of water. As he reached the hallway, he noticed a faint light beneath the door of his office. His heartbeat slowed. Not faster. Slower. Exactly the way it always had before making important decisions. He stopped several feet from the door. Listened. Paper. Very soft footsteps. A drawer opening. Then closing. Jack quietly backed away. He did not interrupt. He did not knock. Instead, he slipped the digital recorder from his pocket, pressed one button, and walked back upstairs. The next morning, Rachel reviewed the overnight camera footage. Benjamin stood beside her. Neither spoke for almost 3 minutes. The video showed Madison entering Jack's office at exactly 11:43 p.m. She carried only her phone. Nothing else. She opened desk drawers, examined folders, checked behind books, even looked underneath framed photographs. Then she walked to the filing cabinet. She pulled gently on the handle. Locked. Again. She looked disappointed. But only for a moment. She removed something from her pocket. A small flashlight. Its narrow beam swept carefully across the cabinet. The hinges. The lock. The edges. As though she were studying it. Trying to understand it. Rachel paused the video. There. She pointed toward the screen. Benjamin leaned closer. What am I missing? She's planning. Rachel answered. People don't inspect locks unless they intend to open them later. Jack stared at the frozen image. He barely recognized the woman smiling back from the screen. The same woman who brought homemade desserts. The same woman who hugged him every weekend. The same woman who called him Dad. Rachel resumed the video. Madison quietly returned every drawer exactly as she had found it. She erased fingerprints from the desk with the sleeve of her sweater. Then, she switched off the flashlight and left the room. Benjamin slowly exhaled. She's careful. Rachel nodded. Very. But not careful enough. She zoomed into the image. Madison's phone screen reflected briefly in the office window. Just long enough to reveal the camera application. Benjamin smiled. She photographed something. Rachel nodded again. Several things. And now we know. She isn't just curious. She's collecting. 2 days later. Rachel called Jack before sunrise. Her voice was unusually serious. I need to see you. Did something happen? Jack asked. Yes. I found someone. Jack met Rachel at Benjamin's office an hour later. She placed a thick folder on the conference table. Across the front, one name had been highlighted. Thomas Holloway. Jack looked up. I don't know him. Rachel nodded. You don't. But Madison did. She opened the folder. 8 years ago. Thomas Holloway was a 79-year-old widower. He hired Madison to sell a small piece of property. Within 6 months, she was helping organize his paperwork, driving him to appointments, introducing him to financial advisors, and slowly becoming involved in nearly every major decision he made. Jack frowned. Was she charged? No. Rachel replied. But after Mr. Holloway died, 3 of his properties were sold far below market value. The buyers, Rachel paused, were companies connected to Madison's uncle. The room fell silent. Benjamin slowly closed the folder, then looked directly at Jack. This may not be the first time she's played this game. Jack sat in complete silence. His eyes never left the folder. 8 years. For 8 years. There had been another family. Another elderly man. Another story that had ended with unanswered questions. Rachel quietly closed the file. I want to be very clear, she said. We do not have evidence that Madison committed a crime. Benjamin nodded. And we will never accuse someone without evidence. Rachel continued. But we do have something investigators learn to respect. Patterns. She slid another document across the table. This is the timeline. Jack looked down. It showed every major event involving Thomas Holloway. The day Madison met him. The day she began helping with paperwork. The day she was added as an emergency contact. The day his longtime accountant stopped working with him. The day several properties were sold. The day Mr. Holloway died. Everything had happened gradually. Nothing happened overnight. That was the frightening part. Rachel tapped the paper. Manipulators almost never rush. They replace one trusted person at a time. By the time anyone notices, they've already become indispensable. Jack slowly nodded. Then something occurred to him. She's doing the same thing here. Rachel smiled. I believe so. Benjamin leaned forward. Tell us something. Has Madison started insisting on helping with things you never asked her to do? Jack thought for a moment. Then laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny. Because he suddenly realized how much he had ignored. She organizes my medications. She reminds me about appointments. She answers the front door before I can. She even started opening my mail. Benjamin and Rachel exchanged a glance. Neither liked what they were hearing. Rachel spoke softly. That's not kindness. That's replacement. Jack drove home with those words echoing in his mind. Replacement. Not kindness. Replacement. When he walked inside, Madison was already waiting. She smiled warmly. I made your favorite soup. Jack returned the smile. Thank you. As they walked toward the dining room, she spoke casually. I scheduled your annual physical. Jack stopped. My physical? You mentioned last month that you kept forgetting to call. She replied. So I called for you. Jack hadn't forgotten. He had simply planned to call next week. You didn't have to do that, he said politely. I know. She smiled. I just like helping. Later that evening, Jack quietly checked his voicemail. There was a message from the doctor's office confirming an appointment. Nothing unusual. Except one sentence. If you have any questions, Mrs. Carter has already provided the requested background information. Jack's expression changed. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. Background information? He hadn't authorized anyone to discuss his medical history. The following morning, Benjamin made 2 phone calls. The first, to Jack's physician. The second, to Rachel. By lunchtime, they had their answer. Madison had requested copies of several medical records. She had described herself as a close family caregiver. She had also asked whether the doctor had noticed any signs of memory decline. Jack stared across Benjamin's desk. He could barely believe what he was hearing. I've never missed a payment, he said quietly. I've never forgotten where I live. I still manage every investment myself. Benjamin nodded. We know. Rachel closed her notebook. But she's creating a narrative. A story. One where you're becoming forgetful. One where she appears to be the caring daughter-in-law trying to protect you. Jack leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he truly understood. Moving into the lake house had never been the goal. It had only been the beginning. Benjamin stood and walked toward the window. Then he turned around. I think it's time. Jack looked at him. Time for what? Benjamin smiled. Not with relief. With determination. We stop playing defense. We're going to let Madison think she's controlling the game. But from this moment forward, we build the trap. Rachel picked up her notebook. A slow smile crossed her face. The first Jack had seen since this nightmare began. Good, she said. Because people like Madison always make one mistake. They eventually stop believing. They can't lose. Benjamin waited until the following Monday before putting the next phase into motion. He wanted everything documented. Every signature. Every conversation. Every page. Jack arrived at Benjamin's office shortly after 9 o'clock. A thick stack of legal papers rested neatly on the conference table. Benjamin smiled. I suppose you're wondering why I asked you to bring 2 forms of identification. Jack nodded. I assumed you were updating my estate. In a way, Benjamin replied. But we're doing much more than that. He slid a document across the table. This is your new will. Jack looked surprised. I already have one. You do, Benjamin said. And it's perfectly valid. This one. He paused. Is bait. Jack frowned. Bait? Benjamin nodded. Every word has been reviewed. Every clause is legal. But several harmless details are intentionally incorrect. Jack flipped through the pages. One investment account contained an outdated balance. Another listed an old mailing address. One property description referenced an earlier survey. Nothing affected ownership. Nothing affected inheritance. But every change was deliberate. If anyone copies these documents, Benjamin explained, and later changes them, we'll know exactly where the information came from. Jack slowly smiled. So we're leaving breadcrumbs. Benjamin smiled back. Exactly. Rachel entered carrying a small black safe. It wasn't especially large. Just enough to hold several folders. Jack looked at it curiously. I don't remember buying that. You didn't. Rachel answered. I did. She placed it on the table. The lock is real. The safe is real. But what's inside? She smiled. Isn't. Benjamin carefully placed several photocopied financial records inside. Copies. Not originals. Every page had already been scanned. Photographed. Time-stamped. And most importantly, numbered. Tiny page numbers appeared in the lower right corner. Almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. Jack noticed them. I would have never seen those. Neither will Madison. Rachel replied. Benjamin locked the safe. The originals stay here. He tapped the folders beside him. These copies go into your study. Rachel leaned against the table. If someone opens that safe, they're telling us something. And if pages disappear, they're telling a jury something. The safe was installed later that afternoon. It sat inside a cabinet in Jack's study. Visible enough to attract attention. Hidden enough to appear private. Exactly where Rachel wanted it. The new cameras were even smaller than the first set. One overlooked the cabinet. Another captured the entire study from a bookshelf. A third faced the doorway. None of them could be seen without dismantling the room. When everything was finished, Rachel looked around one last time. We're ready, she said. Jack folded his arms. What if she never takes the bait? Rachel smiled. She will. People rarely spend months chasing something. Only to stop when they get close. Days passed. Then another week. Life inside the lake house settled into an uneasy routine. Madison continued playing the perfect daughter-in-law. She cooked. She cleaned. She brought Jack his morning coffee before he even asked. But Rachel noticed something changing. The kindness was becoming impatience. Madison asked more direct questions. When was the last time you reviewed your investments? Have you considered giving Evan power of attorney someday? Do you still remember all your online banking passwords? Jack answered every question with the same calm expression. I've got everything under control. Each answer seemed to frustrate her just a little more. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Jack announced he was driving into town. I'll probably be gone 2 or 3 hours, he said. Madison smiled. I'll hold down the fort. Jack grabbed his keys, started the truck, backed out of the driveway, and drove away. 20 minutes later, he quietly climbed into Rachel's SUV parked half a mile down the road. Benjamin was already inside. A laptop sat open between them. 3 live camera feeds filled the screen. Nobody spoke. They waited. 37 minutes passed. Nothing. Then, Madison appeared in the hallway. She looked toward the front door. Listened. Walked to the kitchen window. Looked outside. Then disappeared from view. Rachel quietly enlarged one camera feed. The study. Madison stepped inside. She closed the door. Not completely. Just enough. Exactly as before. Benjamin whispered. Here we go. Madison walked directly toward the cabinet. She knelt. Opened the door. And smiled. The safe. She gently ran her fingers across the keypad. Studying it. Thinking. Then, to everyone's surprise, she reached beneath the cabinet. Rachel's eyes narrowed. What's she doing? Madison pulled something from underneath. A small inspection mirror. The kind mechanics use to see behind engines. She carefully angled it beneath the keypad. Watching the reflection. Searching. Benjamin leaned closer to the screen. She's looking for fingerprints. Madison smiled. Slowly pressed 4 numbers. The safe beeped. Rejected. She tried again. Another rejection. Then she stopped. She wasn't guessing. She was learning. Rachel looked at Jack. She's more experienced than we thought. Madison stood. Looked around the room one final time. Then quietly left the room. She hadn't opened the safe. Not yet. But as Rachel watched the empty study on the monitor, she had the unmistakable feeling that the next move would be the most dangerous one yet. Rachel watched the empty study for another minute. Then she closed the laptop. She's not finished, she said quietly. Benjamin nodded. No. She's planning. Jack looked from one to the other. So we wait? Rachel smiled. We wait. And while she's planning, we're going to make her think she's succeeding. The next morning, Benjamin called Jack with another instruction. I want you to leave your office unlocked. Again? Jack asked. Yes. Benjamin replied. But this time, I want you to act distracted. Jack laughed. I don't have to act very hard. Benjamin smiled. Today you do. That afternoon, Jack spread several financial papers across his desk. Real papers. Mixed with carefully prepared copies. He purposely answered a phone call. Gathered only half the documents. Then muttered to himself. I'll finish this later. He walked out of the office. Leaving everything behind. Exactly as Benjamin instructed. The cameras recorded every second. Less than 15 minutes later, Madison appeared. She wasn't smiling anymore. She moved with confidence. The confidence of someone who believed she understood the house better than its owner. She entered the office. Closed the door. Walked straight to the desk. This time, she didn't bother pretending to look around. She immediately began sorting through the papers. One stack. Then another. Then another. Rachel paused the video. Notice that? Benjamin nodded. She knows exactly what she's looking for. Madison suddenly stopped. Her eyes settled on a yellow folder. Across the front, someone had written in black marker, estate planning. She opened it slowly. Inside, Benjamin had placed the revised will. The bait. Madison's breathing visibly slowed. She carefully turned every page. Reading. Studying. Memorizing. Then, she reached into her pocket. Pulled out her phone. And photographed every single page. Jack watched from Rachel's SUV. His jaw tightened. She actually thinks she's found it, he whispered. Rachel never looked away from the screen. That's exactly what we wanted. Madison carefully placed the will back into the folder. She aligned every corner. Straightened every page. Closed the folder. Then, something unexpected happened. Instead of leaving, she walked back toward the study. Rachel immediately switched camera feeds. Madison entered the study. Her eyes locked onto the safe. Again. This time, she wasn't carrying only her phone. She carried a small black pouch. Benjamin leaned forward. What is that? Rachel didn't answer. She was watching too closely. Madison opened the pouch. Inside were several thin plastic tools, a flashlight, and a small notebook. Jack frowned. She came prepared. Rachel finally spoke. No. She came expecting this. Madison shined the flashlight across the keypad. Then lightly dusted it with a fine gray powder. Jack stared. What is she doing? Rachel answered without hesitation. Fingerprint powder. Madison gently blew across the keypad. Several faint fingerprints appeared. She smiled. Benjamin sighed. She thinks Jack uses the same code every time. Madison wrote 4 numbers into her notebook. Then carefully wiped the keypad clean, leaving no trace she had ever been there. She stood. Looked around once more. Then quietly left the room. That evening, Rachel spread several printed photographs across Benjamin's conference table. Each image showed Madison inside the study. Each image carried an exact timestamp, down to the second. Benjamin looked impressed. She's becoming bolder. Rachel nodded. Which means she's becoming impatient. And impatient people. She smiled. Take risks. Just then, Jack's phone rang. The caller ID showed Evan. Jack answered. Hello? His son's voice sounded different. Quieter. Almost nervous. Dad? Can we talk? Alone. Jack slowly looked toward Rachel. Then toward Benjamin. Neither said a word. But all three were thinking exactly the same thing. For the first time, it wasn't Madison asking for a conversation. It was Evan. And something in his voice suggested that the cracks in their plan were finally beginning to show. Jack agreed to meet Evan the following morning. Not at the house. Not where anyone could overhear. Instead, they met at a small diner overlooking the highway. It was the same place Jack used to bring Evan after Little League games. Back when the biggest decision either of them had to make was whether to order pancakes or waffles. Jack arrived first. He chose a booth near the back. 2 cups of coffee sat untouched between them by the time Evan finally walked in. His son looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled. His beard had grown in unevenly. And his eyes looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Evan sat down. Neither man spoke. Not immediately. Finally, Jack smiled. You look tired. Evan gave a weak laugh. I am. Another silence. Then Evan rubbed his hands together. Dad? I don't even know how to start. Jack leaned back. Start wherever you can. Evan stared into his coffee. We're in trouble. I know. Jack answered quietly. Evan looked up. You know? Jack nodded. I know about the debt. Evan's face turned pale. You? How? Jack didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked one of his own. Why didn't you tell me? Evan's shoulders slumped. Because I was ashamed. It started with one credit card. Then another. Then we refinanced the house. I thought I'd get promoted. I didn't. The interest kept growing. We kept borrowing. And eventually, we couldn't breathe anymore. Jack listened without interrupting. You know what hurts the most? Evan asked. I would have helped. Jack replied. Evan closed his eyes. I know. No. Jack continued. You don't. If you'd walked into my house and simply asked, I would have done everything I could. I would have sold investments. I would have written a check. I would have protected my son. Evan looked away. Tears began filling his eyes. I wanted to ask. He whispered. So why didn't you? Jack asked. Evan hesitated. For nearly 10 seconds. He said nothing. Then, he answered. Because Madison said. If we asked, you'd say no. Jack's expression didn't change. But inside, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Evan continued. She kept saying. Your father has millions. He's barely spending any of it. One day it'll all be yours anyway. Then. She stopped talking about borrowing. She started talking about. Evan couldn't finish the sentence. Jack quietly finished it for him. Taking control. Evan slowly nodded. I told her no. He said. At first. But every month. The bills got worse. The collection calls never stopped. And eventually. I stopped arguing. Jack looked at his son. Not with anger. With disappointment. There was a difference. You knew it was wrong. Yes. But you stayed. Another nod. I kept telling myself. We weren't hurting you. I told myself. We were just protecting our future. But lately. Evan swallowed hard. I don't even recognize us anymore. Jack reached across the table. Placed one hand over his son's. It's not too late. He said. Evan looked up. Hope flickered across his face. Tell Madison the truth. Jack continued. Tell her we're going to fix this honestly. If you need help. Ask me. But no more lies. No more games. Evan nodded slowly. I'll try. Jack's expression became serious. No. You'll decide. Trying isn't enough anymore. As they stood to leave. Evan hesitated. Dad? If everything falls apart. Will you ever forgive me? Jack looked at his son for a long moment. Then answered honestly. I already want to. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Neither of them noticed the gray sedan parked across the street. Inside. Madison lowered her phone. She had watched the entire meeting through a telephoto lens. She couldn't hear a single word. But she didn't need to. All she saw was her husband sitting alone with Jack for nearly an hour. Talking. Listening. Shaking hands before they left. As she drove away. Only one thought filled her mind. Evan was becoming a problem. And problems had to be dealt with. Madison didn't confront Evan that night. She did something far more dangerous. She watched him. Every conversation. Every glance. Every moment he spent alone with Jack. She analyzed everything. Looking for one answer. Had he told Jack? For 2 days. She found nothing. Jack behaved exactly as he always had. He drank coffee on the porch. Worked in the garden. Read books by the fireplace. Nothing suggested he knew the truth. But Madison couldn't shake the feeling. Something had changed. Late Wednesday afternoon. She walked into the living room where Evan was watching television. She muted it. We need to talk. Evan sighed. About what? You met with your father. So? So. She folded her arms. What did you tell him? Evan looked directly at her. We talked. About what? Our finances. Madison's expression hardened. You told him? He deserved to know. She stared at him in disbelief. You promised me. I promised I would help us. Evan replied. I never promised I'd lie forever. Madison took a slow breath. She deliberately softened her voice. The same voice Jack had trusted for years. Evan. We are doing this for our family. For our future. If we lose everything, what happens then? Evan looked exhausted. We should have just asked him. We're way past asking. She answered immediately. No. Evan shook his head. We're not. Madison leaned closer. Listen to me. Your father has enough money to solve every problem we've got. And he just sits here. watching sunsets. Evan's eyes widened. Don't. What? Talk about him like that. She laughed bitterly. Why? Because he's generous? He isn't. He's selfish. He's hoarding millions while we're drowning. Evan stood up. His voice rose for the first time. He earned it. Madison froze. So that's what you think? It's the truth. The room fell silent. Neither of them noticed. Jack standing quietly in the hallway, hidden from view, his recorder running inside his shirt pocket. He heard every word. He heard Madison call him selfish. He heard Evan defend him. He heard the anger growing between them. Jack quietly stepped outside before either of them saw him. He didn't want them to know he'd been there. Not yet. That evening, Rachel listened to the recording. She replayed one sentence 3 times. He's hoarding millions while we're drowning. Rachel looked at Benjamin. That sentence changes everything. Benjamin nodded. It establishes motive. Rachel closed the recorder. And it proves this isn't about protecting Jack. It's about getting control of his money. The following Monday, Benjamin received an envelope by certified mail. No return address. Only his office name. Inside were copies of medical forms, appointment summaries, and handwritten notes. Benjamin frowned. Rachel. She walked into his office. What is it? Benjamin handed her the documents. Read the last page. Rachel's expression changed immediately. The final page was a sworn statement. Signed by Madison. It claimed Jack had become forgetful. That he often misplaced paperwork. That he struggled to remember appointments. That he appeared confused about his finances. Rachel slowly lowered the papers. She's moving. Benjamin nodded. She's preparing an emergency guardianship petition. Jack arrived 30 minutes later. Benjamin silently pushed the documents across the desk. Jack read every page. His hands remained perfectly still. Only his eyes revealed the disappointment. Finally, he looked up. So, he said quietly. She wants the court to believe I'm no longer capable of managing my own life. Benjamin folded his hands. Yes. Rachel stood beside the window, watching the rain fall outside. Then she turned back toward Jack. A calm smile crossed her face. It's time, she said. Jack looked at her. Time for what? Rachel's eyes never left his. Time. For Madison. To make the biggest mistake of her life. Benjamin refused to rush. That surprised Jack. If she's preparing to file, Jack said, shouldn't we stop her now? Benjamin calmly shook his head. No. Why not? Because right now, Benjamin replied, she's only planning. I don't want to defeat her plan. I want her to commit to it. Rachel smiled. The farther she goes, the harder it'll be for her to explain later. Jack slowly nodded. He was beginning to understand how both of them thought. Neither reacted emotionally. They let facts do the work. Over the next week, life inside the lake house became strangely peaceful. Madison smiled more than ever. She cooked elaborate dinners. She laughed at Jack's stories. She even suggested they all spend an afternoon fishing together. To anyone looking from the outside, they appeared to be the perfect family. Rachel wasn't fooled. Whenever someone suddenly becomes nicer, she told Jack, I always ask myself one question. What do they need? The answer came 3 days later. Jack intentionally mentioned during breakfast, I've got an appointment with Benjamin tomorrow. Madison looked up immediately. Oh? What for? Jack shrugged casually. Just updating a few estate documents. He saw it. Only for a fraction of a second. Her smile disappeared. Then it returned. That's probably a good idea, she said. We're all getting older. Jack simply nodded. I suppose we are. The next morning, Jack deliberately left the house carrying a leather briefcase. Inside, there was nothing important. Just yesterday's newspaper. Benjamin had the real documents safely locked inside his office. 2 hours later, Jack returned home. He acted tired. Placed the briefcase inside the study. Locked the cabinet containing the safe. Then announced, I'm going to take a nap. Rachel's cameras began recording continuously. Nearly an hour passed. Nothing. Then Evan left the house to buy groceries. Jack remained upstairs. Or at least, that's what Madison believed. She quietly walked toward the study. This time, she wasn't nervous. She looked confident. Almost excited. She closed the door completely. Removed the black pouch from her handbag. And walked directly to the cabinet. Jack watched everything from Rachel's laptop inside Benjamin's office. No one spoke. Madison entered 4 numbers into the keypad. The safe beeped. The lock clicked. Benjamin looked surprised. She got it. Rachel nodded once. I expected she would. Madison slowly opened the safe. Inside were neatly organized financial folders. Investment records. Property deeds. Bank statements. Estate documents. Exactly what she had hoped to find. Her breathing became noticeably faster. She glanced toward the door. Listened. Then began photographing every page. One folder. Then another. Then another. Rachel quietly saved another backup of the recording. Keep going, she whispered. Madison reached the final folder. She stopped. Looked at the pages. Thought for several seconds. Then, she did something Rachel had been waiting for. Instead of returning the documents, she removed several pages. Jack leaned forward. What is she doing? Rachel never looked away from the screen. Exactly what I hoped. Madison opened her handbag. Removed several freshly printed pages. And quietly exchanged them. Original pages out. Replacement pages in. Benjamin smiled for the first time all day. She isn't stealing. She's altering evidence. Madison carefully aligned every sheet. Closed each folder. Locked the safe. Wiped the keypad clean. Then walked calmly out of the study. The room inside Benjamin's office remained silent. Finally, Rachel closed the laptop. It's over, she said. Jack frowned. What do you mean? Rachel reached into another folder. She removed the original photocopies. Every page had already been catalogued. Every page carried a microscopic page number in the bottom corner. Numbers impossible to notice without magnification. Benjamin laid Madison's replacement pages beside the originals. The difference was immediate. Page 7 was now missing. Page 12 had been replaced. Page 18 contained different account balances. Benjamin slowly looked at Jack. She just committed document tampering. And she did it. Rachel added. On 3 different cameras. Jack sat back in his chair. For weeks, he had felt like the prey. For the first time, that feeling disappeared. Rachel gathered the evidence into a single binder. Video recordings. Timestamps. Still photographs. Original pages. Replacement pages. Digital backups. Witness logs. Everything. She handed the binder to Benjamin. Protect it, she said. Benjamin closed the binder carefully. I will. Rachel looked out the window. Dark clouds rolled across the mountains beyond Lake Blue Ridge. A storm was coming. She wasn't looking at the weather. She was thinking about Madison. Because once someone begins forging documents, there's usually only one reason. They're getting ready to present them to a judge. 3 mornings later, the move everyone had been expecting finally happened. Benjamin's office received an official court filing. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. Filed by Madison Carter. Benjamin read every page twice. Then he quietly picked up the phone. Rachel, he said. It's time. An hour later, Jack sat across from Benjamin's desk. The petition rested between them. Jack slowly turned the pages. His expression remained calm. But every sentence became harder to read. According to the petition, Jack frequently forgot conversations. He misplaced important financial records. He struggled to remember appointments. He appeared confused while discussing investments. And, most painfully, the petition claimed he was vulnerable to financial exploitation. Jack looked up. I've spent 40 years building a business. I negotiated million-dollar contracts. I managed hundreds of employees. And now, she wants a judge to believe I can't balance a checkbook. Benjamin nodded. She has to convince the court that taking control of your finances is an emergency. Rachel opened another folder. Fortunately, she said, she just gave us something. She placed Madison's supporting documents beside the originals. The differences were impossible to miss. Bank balances had changed. Investment totals were different. Several pages contained information that had never existed. Rachel tapped one document. This account doesn't even exist. Benjamin smiled slightly. And this property valuation? He lifted another page. Matches the fake document we intentionally left in the study. Jack finally understood. Every false document Madison submitted had come directly from the bait. Benjamin leaned back. She believed she was building evidence. In reality, she's proving she accessed documents she never had permission to touch. Rachel looked toward Jack. There'll be a hearing in a few days. Between now and then, I want everything organized. No surprises. No missing evidence. And absolutely no contact with Madison unless necessary. Jack nodded. I understand. That evening, the atmosphere inside the lake house had changed. Madison walked through the house with unusual confidence. She hummed while preparing dinner. She smiled more often. She even poured Jack an extra cup of coffee. She believed she had already won. Evan noticed it too. After dinner, he quietly followed Madison into the kitchen. Did you file it? He asked. Madison didn't even look surprised. She simply nodded. Yes. Evan lowered his voice. You actually did it. I had to. No. He replied. You chose to. Madison folded her arms. We're out of time. If the court appoints me guardian, we can finally stop worrying about money. Evan stared at her. Do you even hear yourself? You sound like this is already your money. It will be, she answered. Without thinking. The words hung in the air. Even Madison realized what she just said. She tried to recover. I mean, we'll manage it responsibly. But it was too late. Evan stepped backward. Slowly. As though he were looking at a stranger. You don't want to protect him, he whispered. You want to control him. Madison's patience finally disappeared. "And what if I do?" she snapped. "He's almost 70. How many years do you think he has left?" Evan's face went completely pale. "What did you just say?" Madison sighed impatiently. "You know exactly what I meant." "No," Evan replied. "I don't. Because the woman I married would never measure someone's life by how long until they leave an inheritance." Without another word, Evan walked out of the kitchen, grabbed his car keys, and drove away. Less than 20 minutes later, Rachel's phone rang. The caller ID displayed one name: Evan Mercer. Rachel answered. "This is Rachel." For several seconds, she said nothing. She simply listened. Finally, she spoke. "Meet me tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Benjamin's office." She ended the call. Jack looked at her. "What did he say?" Rachel slowly placed the phone on the table. A calm smile crossed her face. "Not much," she admitted. "But I recognized something in his voice." "What?" Jack asked. Rachel looked directly at him. "Guilt. And guilt has a way of telling the truth when nothing else will." The next morning, Benjamin arrived at his office before sunrise. He wasn't preparing an argument. He was preparing a timeline. Every photograph, every recording, every financial document, every timestamp, every witness statement, everything was arranged in chronological order. Benjamin believed juries and judges understood one thing better than anything else: the truth, when it was impossible to rearrange. At exactly 9 o'clock, Evan walked through the front door. He looked like a man carrying something far heavier than debt. He looked like a man carrying regret. Rachel greeted him first. She didn't shake his hand. She didn't accuse him. She simply pointed toward an empty chair. "Sit," she said gently. Evan sat down. His eyes never met Jack's. Benjamin quietly closed the conference room door. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "I have one question." Evan nodded. "When this began," she asked, "did you believe your father was mentally incapable of managing his own affairs?" Evan answered immediately. "No." Rachel nodded. "Thank you." She asked another. "Has your father ever forgotten who you are?" "No." "Has he ever failed to recognize his own home?" "No." "Has he ever asked you to manage his finances because he couldn't?" "No." Rachel leaned forward. Her voice remained calm. "Then why are we here?" Evan closed his eyes. "Because we were desperate." He looked toward Jack for the first time. "I kept telling myself we'd fix everything before you found out. I kept telling myself no one would get hurt. I was wrong." Jack didn't interrupt. He simply listened. Rachel reached into her folder. She removed a single sheet of paper. "This," she said, "is the witness list." She slid it across the table. "If this case reaches the hearing, you have a choice. You can continue protecting someone who has already committed forgery. Or you can tell the truth." Evan stared at the paper. His hands trembled slightly. Rachel spoke one final sentence. The sentence she had rehearsed carefully. "If this reaches court, one of you may still walk away." But not both. No one spoke after that. Evans slowly stood. Without another word. He walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned back toward his father. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he walked away. 3 days later, the courtroom was nearly full. Madison arrived wearing a dark blue suit. Her hair was perfectly styled. Every document rested inside a leather portfolio. She looked confident, prepared, victorious. She smiled at Evan. He didn't smile back. Jack entered moments later beside Benjamin. Rachel followed quietly behind them carrying 3 evidence binders. Each binder contained identical copies. One for the court. One for opposing counsel. One for the judge. Benjamin whispered to Jack. "Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. And let the evidence speak." The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise." Everyone stood as the judge entered the courtroom. The judge reviewed the file for several moments. Then looked toward Madison. "Mrs. Carter, you've petitioned this court for emergency guardianship over Mr. Jack Mercer. You may proceed." Madison stood confidently. She walked to the lectern, opened her portfolio, and began speaking. "Your Honor, my father-in-law has shown significant cognitive decline. He forgets conversations. He struggles with financial decisions. And I fear he is no longer capable of protecting himself." She handed several documents to the court clerk. The very documents she believed would prove her case. Benjamin didn't object. He didn't interrupt. He simply waited. Because sometimes, the strongest case begins by allowing the other side to commit fully to their own story. Benjamin remained seated. He didn't object. He didn't interrupt. He simply waited for Madison to finish. When she finally returned to her table, the courtroom grew quiet. The judge looked toward Benjamin. "Counsel, you may respond." Benjamin stood slowly, straightened his jacket, picked up a single folder. Nothing more. He walked to the lectern. "Your Honor," he began calmly, "my client welcomes this hearing." Madison frowned. That wasn't the response she expected. Benjamin continued. "In fact, Mr. Mercer has been looking forward to the opportunity to answer every allegation." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Benjamin picked up one of Madison's financial records. "Mrs. Carter submitted this bank statement," he said, claiming it accurately reflects Mr. Mercer's finances. He held up another document. "And this," he continued, "is the original." The judge adjusted his glasses. Benjamin placed both pages side by side. "Would the court kindly note that the balances are different?" Madison shifted in her chair. Just slightly. Benjamin didn't even look at her. He turned another page. "This property valuation," he said, "also differs. And this investment summary contains account numbers that have never existed." The judge looked toward Madison. "Mrs. Carter, can you explain these discrepancies?" Madison stood. Her confidence hadn't disappeared yet. "There must have been a copying error," she replied. Benjamin smiled politely. "A copying error? Perhaps." He walked back to his table, opened a second binder, then returned carrying a small stack of photographs. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit 12. The courtroom monitor came to life. A security video appeared on the screen. It showed Jack's study, the cabinet, the safe, and Madison. The room became completely silent. The video played. Madison entered, opened the safe, removed documents, photographed them. Then, the crucial moment. She quietly removed several pages, reached into her handbag, and replaced them with different ones. Benjamin paused the recording. "Would you like me to continue?" he asked. Madison's attorney slowly stood. His face had lost all confidence. "No objection," he said quietly. Benjamin pressed play again. The recording continued, showing Madison carefully locking the safe, wiping the keypad, leaving the room. Benjamin turned toward the judge. The original documents, he explained, had already been catalogued. Every page carried an identification number. Those numbers disappeared only after Mrs. Carter substituted the pages. The judge leaned forward, looking closely at the evidence. "Do you have proof these recordings haven't been altered?" Benjamin smiled. "I do." He turned toward Rachel. "The defense calls Rachel Brooks." Rachel walked calmly to the witness stand. She took the oath, sat down, folded her hands, and waited. Benjamin approached. "Please state your occupation." "I am a retired FBI financial crimes investigator," Rachel replied. "Did you supervise the collection of this evidence?" "Yes." "Was every recording preserved with its original timestamp?" "Yes." "Were backup copies created immediately after each recording?" "Yes." "Has any video presented today been edited?" "No." Benjamin nodded. No further questions. Madison's attorney slowly approached the witness stand. He looked down at his notes, then back at Rachel. "Mrs. Brooks," he began. "Isn't it possible that my client merely examined documents out of concern for Mr. Mercer?" Rachel answered without hesitation. "Examining documents," she said, "doesn't require replacing them." The courtroom fell silent again. The attorney looked down. He had no follow-up question. Rachel stepped down from the witness stand. As she walked past Jack, she gave the slightest nod. One battle was over. But Benjamin wasn't finished. He looked toward the judge, then toward the witness list. "Your Honor," he said. "The defense calls Evan Mercer." Madison turned sharply toward her husband. For the first time that morning, fear appeared on her face. She forced a smile, certain he was about to save her. Every eye in the courtroom followed Evan as he slowly stood. Madison smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. Evan walked toward the witness stand. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The bailiff administered the oath. Evan raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, then quietly took his seat. Benjamin approached. His voice remained calm, respectful, almost gentle. "Mr. Mercer, how long have you lived with your father?" "A little over 2 months," Evan answered. "During those 2 months," Benjamin continued, "did your father ever fail to recognize you?" "No." "Did he forget where he lived?" "No." "Did he ask you to manage his finances because he was unable to?" "No." Benjamin paused, then asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "In your opinion, Is your father mentally incapable of handling his own affairs? Evan looked toward Jack. Their eyes met. Jack didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He simply watched his son. Evan took a deep breath. "No," he said firmly. Madison's smile disappeared. Benjamin remained expressionless. "Would you explain your answer?" Evan swallowed hard. "My father is one of the sharpest people I've ever known. He still manages his investments. He remembers every appointment. He still gives me better financial advice than anyone I've ever met." The courtroom remained silent. Benjamin asked one final question. "Then why was this petition filed?" Evan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Because we were drowning in debt." A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand. Silence returned. Benjamin didn't interrupt. He let Evan continue. "We owed almost $180,000. Our credit cards were maxed out. We were behind on loans. We were terrified." He looked toward Madison. "At first, we talked about asking Dad for help. Then, we started talking about his inheritance." Madison slowly shook her head. Barely noticeable. Evan saw it. For years, that silent signal had been enough. Not today. He continued. Madison believed that if the court declared Dad incompetent, she could control his finances. Madison suddenly stood. "That's a lie," she shouted. The judge struck the gavel. "Mrs. Carter, you will remain seated." She slowly sat down. Her breathing had become uneven. Benjamin waited until the courtroom became quiet again. "Mr. Mercer," he asked softly, "did anyone force you to testify today?" "No." "Did your father threaten you?" "No." "Did Rachel Brooks promise you anything?" "No." "Then why are you telling us this now?" Evan's voice broke. "Because I can't keep lying to my father. He spent his whole life teaching me that your name is worth more than your money. And I almost destroyed both." Jack lowered his head. He quietly wiped away a tear. Benjamin looked toward the judge. "No further questions." Madison's attorney stood slowly. He looked at Evan, then at the mountain of evidence stacked across the courtroom. He knew there was no repairing what had just happened. He asked only one question. "Mr. Mercer, do you still love your wife?" Evan's eyes filled again. "I do," he whispered. "But loving someone doesn't mean helping them destroy another person." The courtroom became completely silent. Not a single person moved. Even the judge leaned back in his chair, watching, thinking, absorbing everything that had just unfolded. Benjamin quietly returned to his table. He didn't need another witness. He didn't need another exhibit. The truth had just testified. The judge remained silent for nearly 30 seconds. No one dared speak. No one dared move. The only sound inside the courtroom was the slow turning of legal papers. Finally, the judge removed his glasses, looked first at Jack, then at Evan, and finally, at Madison. "Mrs. Carter," he said calmly, This court was asked to believe that Mr. Jack Mercer could no longer manage his own affairs. Instead, the evidence has shown something entirely different. He picked up the petition from his desk. It has shown that false documents were submitted. It has shown that confidential records were accessed without authorization. And it has shown that this petition was supported by evidence that cannot be trusted. He looked directly at Madison. Accordingly, this petition for emergency guardianship is denied. A quiet breath escaped Jack. Not relief. Peace. For the first time in months, he felt the weight begin to lift. The judge wasn't finished. He turned toward the court clerk. I am referring today's evidence to the district attorney for review of possible criminal charges, including forgery, identity theft, document tampering, and attempted financial exploitation of an elderly adult. The courtroom became absolutely silent. Madison's attorney slowly lowered his head. He knew the hearing was over. Now, a criminal investigation was beginning. Two investigators who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom stood up. They walked toward Madison. One of them spoke softly. Mrs. Madison Carter, please stand. Madison looked toward her attorney. He couldn't help her. She looked toward Evan. He couldn't even meet her eyes. Her confidence disappeared. For the first time, she looked afraid. Mrs. Carter, you're being placed under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. The investigator gently placed handcuffs around her wrists. No shouting. No struggle. No dramatic scene. Just the quiet sound of consequences. As she was escorted toward the courtroom doors, Madison stopped. She turned back toward Jack. For a moment, it looked as though she wanted to apologize. Instead, she said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Weeks passed. Then months. Autumn slowly gave way to winter. The trees surrounding Lake Blue Ridge stood bare against the cold sky. But inside the lake house, something had changed. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Evan returned one Saturday morning. He came alone. No moving truck. No luggage. No excuses. Jack opened the front door. Neither man spoke. Finally, Evan broke the silence. Dad? I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here because I owe you the truth. And an apology. Jack nodded quietly. Come inside. They sat on the back porch overlooking the lake. The same place where Jack had spent hundreds of peaceful mornings. Evan stared across the water. I keep wishing I could undo everything. Every lie. Every decision. Every day I chose fear over honesty. Jack looked at his son. You can. None of us can change yesterday. Evan lowered his head. I know. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. I forgive you. Evan closed his eyes. A tear rolled down his face. Jack continued. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Trust isn't rebuilt with words. It's rebuilt with time. One honest choice after another. Evan nodded. For the first time in months, his shoulders relaxed. He understood. Forgiveness had been given. Trust would have to be earned. Rachel Brooks officially retired a few weeks later. She declined every consulting offer that came her way. When Benjamin asked what she planned to do next, she smiled. I'm thinking of buying a little cabin somewhere. Someplace with no paperwork. No investigations. And absolutely no hidden cameras. Benjamin laughed. After this case, I can't blame you. He looked toward Jack. then shook his head. "I've handled estate law for 32 years. And I can honestly say, this was the strangest inheritance case of my career." Spring arrived. The flowers around the lake house bloomed once again. Jack spent his mornings tending the gardens Linda had loved. Exactly as he always had. One quiet sunrise. He carried a cup of coffee onto the porch. The lake was perfectly still. The mountains reflected across the water like glass. Birds drifted above the shoreline. Everything felt peaceful. Jack smiled. Not because he had protected his fortune. Money had never really been the point. He had protected something far more valuable. His independence. His dignity. His family's chance to find its way back. And finally, his peace. He took one slow sip of coffee, watched the sun rise above Lake Blue Ridge, and quietly whispered the words that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Money built the house, but wisdom kept it.